Hello everyone, today I'll continue sharing the story of the single mother, Dieu Hân. Hân's journey to find her father had finally come to an end. Tan brought her back home after a long trip that lasted an entire day and night. By the time they reached the gate, exhaustion was written all over their faces, but Tan still had to bid Hân a hurried farewell so he could rush back to work. Standing in front of her familiar home, Hân felt a warm sense of comfort spreading through her heart. Everything was just as she had remembered, except that time had left its traces. Overgrown grass had taken over the garden, and dust had settled throughout the house. Yet to Hân, these sights were nothing but deeply cherished memories. As soon as she stepped inside, Hân wasted no time and began cleaning. The sound of the broom sweeping across the floor seemed to erase the remnants of loneliness and neglect. Once she had finished tidying up, Hân carefully opened her bag and took out a letter, one her father had sent her. Hân sat quietly, reading every single word her father had written to her. Each line felt like a distant warmth, gently soothing the heart that had long yearned for the love of family. Tears fell from her eyes, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming happiness. Though they had yet to reunite, at least she now knew who her father was, and Hân firmly believed that one day soon, he would come back to her. Hân felt truly fortunate for having persevered in her search for her father, despite all the hardships and dangers she had faced. In the end, it was all rewarded with the truth she had longed for. Gradually, Hân's life began to return to its peaceful days. That day it was avocado season. Seeing the ripe clusters hanging in the garden, Hân suddenly thought of Yuyan, the friend who had stood by her and helped her through the hardest times. Without hesitation, Hân asked her neighbor to watch her child, then rolled up her sleeves and headed into the garden. The avocados were long, glossy, and perfectly ripe, glistening under the golden sunlight. Hân carefully picked out the best ones, smiling with satisfaction as she harvested them. Once she had gathered enough, she sat beneath the shade of a tree, cut one open, and savored its rich, creamy sweetness that she had missed for so long. Afterward, Hân neatly packed each avocado into a box, wrapping them with care to send to Yuyan. Though Hân's frame was small and delicate, she carried the heavy box on her shoulders without a single complaint. For in her heart, the joy of sharing with her friend was far greater than the weight she bore. In that moment, Hân felt that no matter how many storms life might bring, as long as there was love and resilience, everything would one day return to peace, just like it had that day. After a long, exhausting day of picking avocados, Hân's shoulders ached, and her hands were rough from hours of climbing, reaching, and carrying heavy loads. Yet, the moment she managed to deliver a basket full of fresh avocados to Yuyan, an unexpected sense of relief and satisfaction filled her heart. By then, the sky had already darkened, and night slowly enveloped the quiet village road. Only the rustling of the trees and the steady chorus of crickets echoed in the stillness. Carrying her now empty basket, Hân walked home with slow, deliberate steps. The familiar path, bathed in pale moonlight, felt strangely long and lonely. Suddenly, as she passed a small turn near the edge of the village, she froze. Under the dim glow of the moon, she spotted a woman lying motionless by the roadside, her figure pitiful and frail. Hân's heart pounded wildly. Without a second thought, she rushed toward the woman. The stranger was unconscious, her breathing faint, and her pale face looked as though it had endured hours of suffering and exhaustion. "Miss, can you hear me?" Hân asked softly, shaking her gently. But there was no response, only an unsettling silence. Panic gripped her chest. Hân called out for help, her voice ringing out into the empty night, but no one came. A few passers-by glanced at her but simply walked on, unwilling to get involved. Gritting her teeth, Hân drew a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage. She couldn't abandon the woman. Bending down, she carefully lifted her onto her back. Though Hân's petite frame trembled under the weight, sheer determination and compassion fueled her every step as she carried the stranger home. By the time she reached her house, Hân was drenched in sweat, her breathing ragged. Still, she gently laid the woman down on the only bed she had. "Please, you have to wake up," Hân whispered desperately, but there was no response. Her heart tightening with worry, Hân grabbed a clean towel and softly wiped the woman's face and hands, hoping the warmth might bring her back. Nothing worked. Sitting down for a brief moment, Hân buried her face in her hands. She didn't know who this woman was or where she came from, but leaving her to suffer was not an option. After a moment of deep thought, Han stood up and headed to the kitchen. She decided to make a pot of hot porridge. The sound of her stirring filled the small house, mingling with the faint whistle of the night wind outside. Han kept glancing toward the bed where the stranger lay motionless, occasionally murmuring incoherently as if trapped in a restless dream. Once the porridge was ready, Han let the woman rest and hurried next door to pick up her son from the neighbor's house. The moment the little boy saw his mother, he ran into her arms, clinging tightly as though he'd been holding back all his longing throughout the day. Hand in hand, mother and son walked home under the pitch-black sky, where there wasn't a single streetlight. Only the rhythmic croaking of frogs and the hum of nocturnal insects accompanied them. Back at home, Han quickly changed her son's clothes and fed him dinner. The little boy ate hungrily, chatting in his innocent, cheerful way, while Han's eyes often drifted back to the unconscious woman lying on her bed. When everything was finally in order, Han had only enough time to eat a few hurried spoonfuls of cold porridge herself. With only one bed in the house, she gave it up for the stranger. Han and her son spread out a thin mat on the floor and lay down together. Before turning in for the night, Han walked over to the woman once more, gently pulling the blanket up to her shoulders and whispering softly, "I hope you'll wake up tomorrow." The next morning, the young woman slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze, still hazy, wandered around the unfamiliar room. She tried to sit up, but her frail body wavered, unable to hold its balance. Confused, she took a few hesitant steps, searching for an explanation, but she had no idea where she was. In the kitchen, Han was preparing breakfast when she heard the sound of movement. Alarmed, she quickly rushed out. Seeing the pale, weak young woman struggling to stand, Han immediately hurried over and gently helped her back onto the bed. "You're still too weak. Lie down and rest," Han said softly, her voice tender yet firm. "When you're feeling better, I'll explain everything to you." The young woman hesitated for a moment, but Han's sincere gaze gave her a sense of comfort and trust. Deep down, she thought how fortunate she was to have met such a kind-hearted person in her time of need. After settling the young woman back in bed, Han returned to the kitchen and began cooking a pot of hot porridge. The warm, savory aroma soon filled the small house, bringing a quiet sense of comfort to the room. Han carefully seasoned it, hoping that this simple meal would help the girl regain her strength. When the porridge was ready, Han brought a steaming bowl to her bedside. "Here, have some porridge. It will help you feel better," Han said with a gentle smile. The young woman weakly nodded, her trembling hands accepting the bowl. With each spoonful of warm porridge, color gradually returned to her cheeks, and her strength slowly began to return. Looking at Han, her eyes filled with gratitude. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. Why am I here?" she asked in a hoarse voice. Han set the bowl down on the table, sat beside her, and calmly explained everything. How she had found the young woman unconscious on the roadside the previous night, how she had called out for help but no one came, and finally, how she had decided to carry her home and care for her. Hearing this, the young woman's eyes welled up with tears. She held Han's hand tightly and said with deep emotion, "Thank you. Thank you for not leaving me out there in the dark. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." Han gently shook her head and gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't say that. You're safe now. Just rest. When you're fully recovered, we can talk more." In that quiet little house, the morning light streamed through the window, carrying with it a warmth that promised better days ahead. After a while of talking, the girl introduced herself as An. She shared her story. She had married an abusive husband who constantly beat her, squandered all their money, and eventually threw her out of the house. With nowhere to go, An wandered endlessly, walking without direction until she somehow ended up here. She herself didn't even know how far she had come. Hearing her story, Han fell silent, deeply moved as she saw her own past reflected in An. Gently holding An's hand, Han comforted her. "It's okay, An. You'll get through this. I've been through the same dark days, but I promise life will get better." An slowly nodded, a faint, fragile smile appearing on her lips. Han handed her a warm cup of water and softly said, "Just think of this place as your home. Rest now, and when you're ready, we'll start over together." In that moment, An felt a warmth she hadn't known in a very long time, a glimmer of hope returning to her heart. Han decided to help the poor girl with all her heart. That morning, after feeding her son breakfast, Han carried him along and went out to buy essential items for On. Han thought that On needed new clothes, personal belongings, and some food to start over. On the way, Han stopped by her neighbor's house to buy a few things. When the neighbor heard that Han was going to take On in, she looked worried. Han, be careful. You might get tricked. These days, it's hard to know who's real and who's not. But Han simply smiled and shook her head. Deep down, she believed that On was just like her in the past. A woman who had been through hardship and only needed a helping hand to stand up again. Since the house Han was living in was rented, she went to see the landlord to ask for permission to let On stay with her. Fortunately, the landlord was a kind-hearted man. After hearing Han's brief explanation, he nodded in agreement without hesitation. Han, I trust you. You're a good person and I believe you won't make the wrong choice. Those words warmed Han's heart. That evening, Han gave On a set of new clothes. On held the clothes in her hands, her eyes welling up with tears. Thank you. I don't even know what to say. From that day on began helping Han take care of her son and tidy up the house. The two women who shared similar hardships easily found comfort and understanding in each other. That afternoon, Han went into the kitchen and prepared a simple yet hearty meal. Han's little boy seemed to really like On. He laughed brightly, running around the house, occasionally climbing into her lap. Warm laughter filled the small kitchen. That day's lunch was shared by just two women and a little boy, but it was full of love. Amidst all their struggles, they found hope in life, because no matter how many storms came their way, there was still kindness in this world, and new beginnings waiting just ahead. Han's small house felt even more cramped with On now living there, but neither of the women seemed to mind. Seeing their clothes piling up, Han decided they needed a wardrobe to keep everything neat and tidy. That morning, Han took On to borrow some tools from a neighbor. When they saw the planer and the drill, both women hesitated for a moment. They had never used such tools before. But Han smiled reassuringly. Let's give it a try, On. Maybe it's not as hard as we think. Hearing that, On nodded softly. The two women began their work, making use of the old wooden planks Han had saved. Han, who was familiar with fixing things around the house, easily picked out the straightest boards. Though this was the kind of work most people believed only men could do, neither of them hesitated. First, they were clumsy. The planer growled awkwardly, but soon enough On got the hang of it. Each plank was smoothed down, and the scent of freshly cut wood filled the air. Han and On laughed and chatted as they worked, while Han's little boy stood at the doorway, watching his mother and Auntie On with wide, curious eyes. It was such a peaceful scene that, for a moment, all their worries seemed to fade away. Once the planks were ready, Han brought out an old drill. They divided the tasks. Han drilled, On held and assembled the pieces. One by one, each screw was tightened, and the wooden board slowly came together, forming the shape of a wardrobe. Though their hands ached, they couldn't stop smiling, delighted to have built something useful with their own hands. If they had once had good men by their sides, perhaps they wouldn't have had to do such things. But now both Han and On understood. They no longer needed to rely on anyone. Independence was not just a choice, it was their pride. By the end of the day, the wooden wardrobe was finally finished. It was simple and unpolished, yet it carried all the effort and care of two women who had endured so much. Han and On looked at each other and laughed in relief. On felt grateful to have Han's help, while Han felt comforted knowing On was there with her. In that little house, surrounded by calm and warmth, two women and a child found something that felt like family. The wardrobe wasn't just a place to store clothes. It was proof of a new beginning, built by two gentle but unyielding hands that refused to give up on life.
Lá thư của cha đã giúp an ủi phần nào nỗi nhớ của Hân dành cho cha mình. Cuộc sống của Hân lại quay trở lại những ngày bình yên, nhưng sự xuất hiện bí ẩn của người phụ nữ tên Ánh liệu có mang lại rắc rối cho Hân hay không? Liệu quá khứ của Ánh có đúng như những gì mà cô ấy kể hay không? Và Hân sẽ làm gì để giúp Ánh? Mời mọi người đón xem những video tiếp theo nha. Ở những video tiếp theo sẽ hé lộ phần nào quá khứ của Ánh. Mọi người nhớ like, share, bật chuông thông báo khi mình đăng video mới nhất để không bỏ lỡ một video nào. Cảm ơn mọi người đã xem hết video của mình. Rất mong mọi người ủng hộ kênh của mình để mình làm ra nhiều video mới hơn. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại mọi người.